Now may not seem like the best time of year for a video about starting your first garden bed, but it's actually a great time. Starting now will allow you to build your soil gradually and avoid buying a lot of compost and other amendments in the spring. You'll also be able to avoid a last-minute rush before spring planting. But before grabbing your tools to build your first garden bed, please make sure to watch the first video in my Beginning Gardening series, in which I talk about how to find the best location for your garden. After finding the best location for your garden, the next step is to decide whether to grow in raised beds or the native soil. To help with that decision, here's a list of some of the pros and cons of raised beds. I'll start with the pros. Raised beds allow you to choose the soil you grow in, which is an advantage if your soil is contaminated with heavy metals or other toxins. If your native soil is poor, a raised bed with good quality soil may provide higher yields sooner. Raised beds improve drainage, especially if you have heavy clay soil. They allow greater control over soil pH, which can be helpful when growing plants like blueberries that prefer a lower pH than other crops. Raised beds require less stooping and kneeling, which is easier on the knees and lower back. We built a ledge in our raised beds so that we can sit while working in the garden. Soil warms up earlier in raised beds, which allows you to plant earlier and extend the growing season. A layer of hardware cloth under a raised bed keeps moles and other burrowing pests from entering from the bottom. Finally, raised beds allow you to control slope. Our yard slopes away from the sun, but our raised beds slope slightly toward it. This helps the soil warm up in the spring and extends our growing season. So those were the pros. Now let's consider the cons. Raised beds require more work and money to set up, and will eventually have to be replaced if made from wood. It's very difficult to move a raised bed after it's built and filled with soil, so careful planning is required, and you'll have less flexibility in changing the garden layout in the future. Raised beds require more frequent watering, which is a big disadvantage in drought-prone areas. Finally, depending on the construction materials used, it can be more difficult to build raised beds on contour, like you see in permaculture gardens. As you can see, after evaluating the pros and cons, we decided to go with raised beds in most of our garden. Our primary considerations were season extension and having more control over the quality of the soil. Your decision will depend on the quality of your native soil, and also your evaluation of the pros and cons. Whether you decide to grow in raised beds or the native soil, you'll need to consider the size, orientation, and spacing of your beds. Let's start with size. The most important thing to consider regarding the width of your bed is that you can comfortably reach the middle from each side, without walking on the soil, which would cause compaction. A width of 3 to 4 feet is comfortable for most people. Most of our beds are 4 feet wide. The length of the bed is less important, but it shouldn't be so long that it's a hassle to get from one side to the other. Our beds are 8 feet long or less, but this is mostly determined by the confines of our yard. Now let's talk about orientation. It's best to lay out your beds from east to west. As the sun arcs through the sky from east to west, it'll travel along the length of your bed, providing your plants with the most sun. We plant our vertical crops on the north side of beds, and the shorter plants in front to avoid shading. Of course, if you live in the southern hemisphere, you'll want to put your tallest plants on the south side. Now let's consider the spacing between beds. Our yard is pretty small, so we decided to go with very narrow pathways. The path down the center of our garden is 25 inches wide, and the paths branching out from the center are only 18 inches. You probably won't want to go narrower than this. Make sure to take your comfort into consideration, as well as what tools you'll want to use. For example, if you plan to use a wheelbarrow, you'll need wider walking paths. I probably got a little bit ahead of myself talking about the spacing between beds before talking about how much to take on in your first year. As a general rule, I think it's a good idea to start out small. For example, a single 4x8 bed is manageable for a beginner, and it will produce plenty of food. If you start out larger than that, it might lead to frustration and disappointment. That said, I wouldn't want in any way to limit someone's aspirations. I've seen first and second year gardeners do amazing things. Kenny from Maryland is a great example. These pictures from his first year garden show what can be accomplished. Kenny grows an amazing amount of food in a small space. He's now in his third year of gardening, and his results just keep getting better. Dakota Bob is another great example. He started gardening just last year and had truly impressive results, especially considering he lives in Zone 3 and has a short growing season. This year is Bob's second year of gardening, and his results speak for themselves. So as a general rule, it is a good idea to start out small. But if, like Kenny and Bob, your passion for growing your own food won't be satisfied by a single 4x8 bed, by all means try 2 or maybe even 3. If you decide to grow in your native soil, I highly recommend an approach called Lasagna Gardening. The beauty of this approach is that you can start your garden right on top of your lawn without first removing your lawn, and you can do it using only free local resources. Before getting started, you'll need to collect enough brown corrugated cardboard or black and white newsprint to cover the entire garden bed area. You'll also need to collect enough organic matter to cover the cardboard or newspaper. That organic matter can include compost, grass clippings, yard waste, used coffee grounds and filters, spent tea bags, pine needles, shredded paper, shredded autumn leaves, rinsed and crushed eggshells, aged manure, straw, and more. We avoid using any food scraps that might attract mice. After collecting all of the material, soak the 4x8 area of ground with water and then thoroughly cover it with the cardboard or black and white newsprint. If you're using newspaper, make sure to use several layers to thoroughly suppress the grass and weeds. Then pile the rest of the organic matter on top and water it until it's the moisture of a wrung-out sponge. The beauty of starting a lasagna garden bed this time of year is that you'll have plenty of time to continue adding more organic matter as it becomes available through the rest of the summer and into the fall. This will attract earthworms to the area that will help break down the organic matter and integrate it into the native soil. By spring, the material should be mostly decomposed, and you'll have organic rich soil to plant in without having to till, weed, or buy compost. If you'd like to learn more about this method, I've included a link to Patricia Lanza's book, Lasagna Gardening, in the description below. If instead of growing in native soil, you decide to go with a raised bed, you'll have a little more work to do, and you'll have to spend some money. We build our raised beds with untreated pine lumber and have been very happy with the results. They typically last about 10 years, but if you live in an area where termites or the weather might degrade wood more quickly, you probably want to go with a termite and weather-resistant wood like cedar. In general, cedar lasts longer and may be worth the added expense depending on your situation. You can also build raised beds using logs, cinder blocks, or even stones. Rather than go into the details of how we build our raised beds, please see this link to learn more about how we build rectangular beds, and this link to see how we make our keyhole-shaped beds. When building soil for a raised bed, we once again use the lasagna method. We line the bottom of the bed with cardboard and then add organic matter. Given the depth of the beds, we also add some organic topsoil and/or coarse builder's sand, so that the beds won't contain 100% organic matter. Don't worry if you don't have enough material to top it off in the first year. We often take 2 to 3 years to fill up a raised bed. As long as you're growing annuals, this won't be a problem. So now is a great time to start your first garden bed. Starting now will allow you to build your soil using only free local resources and avoid the expense of buying a lot of compost and other amendments. The next video in the Beginning Gardening series will be on how to plant out your first bed. Well, that's all for now. Thank you very much for watching. And until next time, remember, you can change the world one yard at a time.